Good evening and welcome to our Crusader Chat. This evening we're hosting an in-person and virtual discussion regarding our 2023 capital project referendum. I'm Elsie Rodriguez, School Superintendent. In the audience we have our BOE trustee Anthony Anderson and our trustee Suzanne Donahue, as well as members of our cabinet, Dr. Hassler, Mr. Kravitz, Dr. Villas, and Ms. Hawk. And to my left is our Assistant Superintendent for Business and Management Services, Patrick Cahill. Before I turn it over to Mr. Cahill, I want to remind everyone that last year we had a capital project referendum vote on December 6, 2022. That was unfortunately not approved by the voters. The cost of that project was $115 million. The district administered a survey to gather information and help to guide us in developing this new capital project referendum that we believe is more in line with our community's ability to support. As a quick reminder, this vote will take place at Central Valley Elementary School on December 5th, 2023, from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. And so I turn it over to you, Mr. Cahill.
Thank you, Elsie. So we're here tonight to talk about our 2023 capital referendum. And as Elsie mentioned, it's Tuesday, December 5th, 2023 at Central Valley Elementary School, approximately 1 year after last year's vote. And in New York State, it's a requirement that public school districts actually have the authorization or approval of the voters to initiate capital programs. That's why we're having a referendum. That's why we go to the community and ask for their authority to initiate this project. So we're talking about a project with a total cost of $98 million. And that may seem like a lot of money, and it is. But this project would touch on 7 of our school buildings, all of our school buildings, and 5 non-instructional buildings. So literally, almost every facility or building in the district would have some work done or some improvements made. And a lot of this work, and we've talked about this a lot, is very basic work. Components of the building, the boilers, the fire alarm systems, things that are necessary for schools. And I have a bullet here. If we consider boilers, roof replacements, which are major parts of this, fire alarm replacements, which is being done in every one of our schools, and PA system replacements, which is not every building, but it's something like 3 or 4 buildings. That represents $78 million, or approximately 80% of the total ask of the referendum. So it's basic things that periodically need to be done, and in our case, the boilers, the HV, I say heating and ventilation systems, are in many cases over 50 years old. So past their useful life, it's time and necessary to replace some of these things. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, and I'm just going to move a little bit and point, we have the schools and the individual components that make up our project. And literally, this project is composed of many smaller projects, and we submit these projects to the New York State Education Department. And they're reviewed and approved by the Education Department. And we go through a process. We have architects and engineers that help us with this. But it's literally made up of couple of dozen different individual projects. And I'm not going to go through the entire list, but I'll highlight a few things. We're doing boiler replacements or HV work at 5 of our schools, 5 buildings, I should say, 4 schools, and I believe the Education Center. But you see here, I'll start with the high school. So we're doing a boiler replacement project at the high school, fire alarm system upgrade and replacement, upgrade to the public address system at the high school, outdoor bathrooms and concession stand and storage at the high school, and tennis court replacement. Middle school, again, upgrade to the fire alarm system. We're doing some renovations of classrooms at the middle school and laboratories and replacing the roof there. North Main Elementary School, one of our older buildings, has a slightly larger list. We're doing electrical work there, upgrading fire alarms, public address systems, replacing the roof, replacing the boiler, and this is what I'm referring to here. It's a fairly expensive replacement because we're going from a steam system to a hot water system, and we're doing that at North Main, Pine Tree, and Central Valley. So if you actually looked at the details, which are all on our website of the project, you can actually see the numbers involved. And those tend to be more expensive because it's a more extensive replacement of a system. It's not like the boiler at the high school is a replacement in kind. So it's a boiler, we're replacing it with more or less the same sized boiler. In this case with North Main, Pine Tree, and Central Valley, a little different. So moving along, Pine Tree, Again, fire alarm, we're adding a security vestibule at Pine Tree, so that's happening at 3 of our buildings, replacing the roof, replacing the boiler, and then some facade maintenance. And we have facade maintenance, brick repointing at a few of our buildings. Central Valley Elementary School, electrical upgrades, fire alarm, public address system, roof replacement, boiler replacement, refurbished auditorium walls, and again, some exterior facade work. Smith Clove fire alarm, adding a security vestibule there and replacing the boiler. And finally, Sapphire, upgrade fire alarm and adding a security vestibule. On the right-hand side are the other buildings, the non-instructional buildings that I mentioned. And I won't go through that entire list, but it's a smattering of things, miscellaneous things, fire alarm system replacement. At the bus garage, we're replacing the underground storage tanks, or we intend to do some work with those. They're, I guess, 29 years old, so again, close to past their useful life and in need of some work. At the Education Center, which is this building, the administrative building, we're doing some electrical work, upgrading the fire alarm, replacing the roof, and doing some facade and window replacements. And that's, more or less the list. A lot of the details, as I said, are on our website. Some of the numbers associated with the costs associated with these projects can be looked at there. So just in terms of the rationale of the project and some of the benefits, we've had projects that we've known we've kind of needed some work on for years. We've deferred some of these projects, and it's resulted in sort of these outdated systems that are past their useful life and in need of replacement. So we are obviously a public school system with schools, and in many instances, we can't really afford to have systems fail or become inoperable. So we can't have leaky roofs. We can't have boilers and heating systems that don't work in the winter for obvious reasons, fire alarms for obvious reasons. So we can't afford for these systems to fail. For years, we've been repairing these systems. We've spent a lot of money on that. We've kept them in great shape. If you look at some of the details, we have boilers. Many of our boilers are over 50 years old. In the case of Pine Tree, over 60 years old. So, these systems really don't owe us anything. They've done what they needed to do over the years, and we've taken good care of them, but now it's time to replace them with something new. I have a bullet here: repair costs continue unabated and unaidable. So one of the things we're going to talk about when we talk about the finances of the project is the idea that most of the costs associated with are reimbursable to the school district through a program called Building Aid, New York State aid. And so when we spend, let's say, $1 on a capital improvement, we get 70 cents back from the state. With repairs, we do not. We get nothing back. So it's one of those things where it's almost like you're throwing good money after bad at some point, and it makes more sense financially to just reinvest in a new system. The security vestibules, we're adding those at 3 buildings, as I mentioned, so that's something we need and want to do. We did a security assessment and evaluation last year, and that was a recommendation. We'll get into that in a little more detail, I think, in our Q&A. Improve reliability, system reliability, lower maintenance costs, reduce energy consumption, all benefits of some of these improvements. Obviously, these will improve the educational environment, especially in some of the classrooms and laboratories we want to renovate. And the other important piece that I wanted to talk about, we'll talk more about it with the financial, is the idea that the district has this unique opportunity based on the retiring of our existing debt. So we've had debt from various borrowings that we've done over the years. One of the larger ones would be the construction of the high school. So that debt is being repaid, or paid off rather, retired, I would say, in the next 3 to 5 years. So we have this unique opportunity to pay off that debt, bring on the new debt, and do some of this work that we've deferred. And part of the deferral was waiting to save money in our capital reserve for this time, and also waiting for this point in time where some of that existing debt would be paid off. And, the final points, we're trying to maintain the health and the safety, the well-being of our students and our staff in the building while preserving our assets, our district facilities. If there's a roof leak, if there's a steam boiler that that breaks and we have a leak, other damage to the building occurs. It's one of those things where we want to invest in our buildings, we want to maintain our buildings because we've already done that. We want to continue to do that.
Right, and if those things break down, it impacts learning, right? Teaching and
Oh,
learning, because students can't be in the classroom.
Of course. That's one of the main things. And that goes to this idea that we can't afford to have these systems fail. And the bottom line, the overarching goal here is just to preserve and improve our schools, for current and future generations of MW students and families. So next slide, we'll get into a little more deeply some of the financial components of the project. And so I sometimes like to use the acronym BLUF, bottom line up front. And so I did that in the first bullet here. So we're at a point, again, based on the idea of the building aid, the 70% reimbursement that they're eligible for. I'm going to get into the details of the savings with our capital reserve. And finally, the repayment or retirement of existing debt to initiate these long overdue capital projects at every school, instructional buildings with zero tax impact. And it seems, outlandish. How is that possible? Well, I talked a little bit about building aid. Building aid is a program through New York State. Some of the Q&A gets into it. It's been around for decades, really. It's not a new program. And it's a way for the state to assist local school districts with capital and facilities improvements. And basically the way it works is there's a ratio, building aid ratio, which is almost like your reimbursement. And that ratio is dependent on the wealth and the need of the school district. So a high wealth district with low resource needs, because they're wealthy, would have a lower building aid ratio. A high need district would have a higher building aid ratio. And so that's one piece of the formula. The other component is what you're actually doing. So like the eligibility of the construction work that you're doing. So in general, work at a school building is fully eligible for building aid. So that's where we get that 70%. So our building aid ratio is literally 74.1%. We've estimated that our project, all those smaller projects compose the project, is about 95% eligible for building aid. So the areas that wouldn't be eligible would be work here at the education center, not non-instructional buildings, really. And that's how we come up with this 70% aidability or reimbursement. So that's building aid. So it's repaid over generally a 15 to 20-year period, depends on the nature of the work. In our case, it'll be a 15-year period. And the idea is we would need to borrow money, and we borrow money by issuing bonds. And we would borrow money and align the repayment of those bonds and that borrowing to our building aid. So they go hand in hand. The other big piece here related to the financial component or funding would be the capital reserve. So the district has a capital reserve, which is like a savings account for capital projects. We established that in 2017, and we've been adding money to that each year thereafter. And essentially the money that we're adding is surplus from operations, annual operations. So if we underspend the budget, if we receive more state aid than we had budgeted, we would have a surplus at the end of the year, and we can transfer that money into our capital. So we've been doing that since the reserve was established, and we're estimating by the time we start the projects and the time we finish, we'll be able to contribute about $24 million as our down payment from our reserve towards the cost of the project overall. And then the final piece of this is the retirement of the debt. I've talked about that a little bit. So I think by 2028, nearly all of that prior debt would be paid off, the retirement of the debt, and we have the ability to layer on this new debt offset by the building aid and our capital reserve down payment, and have a situation where we can spend $98 million and have no budget increase and therefore no tax increase. So the other piece I just wanted to talk about, it's again related to that change in local share. So the local share, by local share I mean basically the existing and new debt service minus existing and new building aid. So that's the local share. And if you actually look at this project and you look at it over a period of time, and I'm going to show you a schedule in just a minute that actually shows some numbers. We won't go through all of it. But the actual average impact over a 15-year period is minus $37,127. So the change to the local share over time, if we were to initiate this project and the voters authorize it, would be a decrease in the local share. So that's how we're able to say no tax impact, no tax impact. It's building aid, it's the down payment through the capital reserve and the retirement of our existing debt. So the final thing I just wanted to mention was the operational savings that we're going to reap from this. Again, fewer maintenance costs. I've talked about that a little bit, but we've talked about that a lot at other meetings. Increased energy savings and, enhanced reliability for the heating systems, everything else, the fire alarms, the electrical, that will all be more reliable, work better, work in a more energy efficient manner. So all good things. So this is the actual financial schedule that I had just mentioned. I won't go through the entire schedule, mercifully. The collective cheer goes up from the crowd. But what I will point out, I'll just point out a couple of things. So this column here, entitled Local Share, shows our current and estimated debt service minus our building aid. And you see here this shaded gray line is the 2025 fiscal ending 2025 year. So that's where we're talking about some of this work would begin. And say this like prior to summer 2025, but 2025. And so we would start the project. We may or may not borrow money. The way we borrow money initially probably would be bond anticipation notes. They call those bands, so it's like temporary borrowing. But we would once we borrow, then start to repay in the following year. So if you see this local share, we go from $1,343,000 to $1,360,000, $16,663 increase in year one, but year two, it's actually a decrease of $268,000, and then year three, a decrease of $100,000, and so on until it sort of stabilizes here in the year 2030. So if you just take these numbers, the change in local share, year change, and you see this red arrow down here, I've taken the average, that's where we get the average of a $37,127 decrease in the local share, and that's what we mean. And again, there's multiple factors changing, in the model. It's existing, as I said, existing state aid, existing debt service changing, being reduced actually, because as our existing debt service is retired and extinguished, that state aid falls away. So that's occurring as the new state aid and the new debt service is coming online. But again, overall, when we consider the total impact of all those things, it's actually a decrease in the local share. So I know that's a lot to absorb, but
It's very thorough.
a lot of materials out on our website, and we're going to do more of these sessions, and we have questions, a Q&A that we're going to actually go through right now.
We
Right?
do, and then we have a question from someone in the audience, so
Okay.
once we go through that, we'll allow our guests to kind of get up and ask us some questions.
Perfect.
We may actually maybe answer it. We have about 30 questions.
Okay.
So I will begin with question number one, reads, will this allow AC units in schools? It's 2 classrooms during the summer for teachers to teach and students to learn.
Yes, just give me a moment, Elsie. So we've dealt with this question in the past, and in fact, as part of the last capital referendum, as part of this and sort of developing the scope of work, we considered this question very carefully, and the answer is no. Central air conditioning is not part of the scope of work for this project. It does not include central air in the schools. And so I'm going to sort of read an answer, but it's largely due to scarcity of resources, scarcity of funds. We had to make some difficult choices. I think I've talked about this. The original, I don't even want to call it a wish list, the original list of our needs, the capital needs, was somewhere in the neighborhood of $168 million. We had to whittle that down and make some tough choices for last year's referendum, and then we did it even again for this year. And you have to go through and prioritize items. So when.
And I just want to reiterate again that we administered a survey, and the feedback that we received kind of gave us the guidance as to what the priorities were.
Right,
So I
right.
think the task force had to make decisions on what are the priorities that we have to address first.
Exactly. And when you consider that a lot of what we're doing here, upgrading, replacing heating and ventilation systems, fire alarms in school buildings, public address systems, which are critical. There was a question about that for schools. I mean, we make announcements all day long. Building roof replacements. I mean, you can't have a leaky roof
Right.
in a school. Those things alone comprise almost 80% of this project. When you consider that weighed against new central air, which in many cases, we had looked at this about 4 or 5 years ago, prohibitively expensive, very expensive to retrofit, entire floors or wings. I think it just was too much. We're lucky, though, fortunate, that when you consider the district has a large, modern high school building, right, relatively new, fully air-conditioned. Not every school district has that. So we're fortunate that we can house and host our programs, our summer school, our extended school year summer Crusaders program, recreational programs at the high school conditioned building, large building. So we're fortunate in that regard. I think what we will likely do is, in the near future, consider as part of another capital project or program, air conditioning in limited congregate areas of schools, like we had talked about that in cafeterias or auditoriums.
We talked about that
Yep.
specifically, to find large congregate areas so that we could put students in. Because I think we mainly talk about the month of June, sometimes the month of September, and unfortunately, the weather has been very hot
been warm,
or
yeah.
very cold.
Right,
But,
right. But I think it's a future project.
Right.
It's not part of this one.
okay. Can you go into more details on the funding of this $98 million proposal? How do you access building aid? Is it guaranteed funding? Does it need to be repaid? Are taxpayers already funding the capital account each year? And what debt is being retired that allows for funds to be allocated to this project? Does this mean the district will incur new debt? How long will it take to pay off this assumed debt? Lot of pieces to
Yeah,
that
there's a lot of
question.
questions embedded in that question. So building aid, I've touched on some of these things, but I'm going to sort of read a response. Building aid is a program funded, administered by New York State Education Department. It provides reimbursement for eligible capital projects carried out by New York State school districts. So generally speaking, I touched on this previously, costs associated with capital projects that make improvements in schools are fully eligible with voter approval. The term can vary. In our case, our improvements would be a 15-year building aid eligible. If you constructed a new building, it can be 30 years. If you add an addition, 5. So that term can vary a little bit. Let's see. Building aid, not a loan, therefore there's no requirement to repay it. I think that was a question. It's state aid, and to access it, there's a process. Our projects, the plan specifications, the projects are reviewed and approved by New York State Ed Department. We work with the state aid unit in New York State Ed Department to establish the building aid, and then we go through the capital construction process. There's a certification of substantial completion, and then the final step to receive your building aid is filing of a final cost report. Let's see if there's more here. So I talked about some of this previously, but the formula for building aid works as follows. Each school district in New York State is assigning a building aid ratio that I mentioned earlier, the reimbursement rate. The ratios are calculated by the state and take into account wealth and resource needs of the district. Our current aid ratio is 74.1%, and then I also talked about how much of the work is aidable. So, work at The buildings and grounds garage, not aidable.
Right.
Students aren't there,
Work
it's not
here,
instructional
not
space.
aidable.
Not aidable, exactly. In our case, our project's 95% aidable, which is good. And we had scaled back some of the work here at the Ed Center to make that so. The building aid program has been around for decades. Now, it has changed over time. I think that was one of the questions, is it a guarantee? But generally, the changes are always prospective. So in other words, if they make a change, it's going to be for new project approved by the commissioner going forward. Existing projects that are approved are essentially aided under the old rules, or if you will, or formula. Let's see. I think they asked about the capital
They did.
reserve
They
there.
asked about the
A
capital
lot of
reserve
questions in
and-
that one.
And debt service.
Yeah, so the capital reserve I mentioned was established in 2017. It's been funded through contributions or transfers from the general fund each year. It's from surplus from operations. I talked about that a little bit. And basically, we transfer these surplus funds into the reserve for future capital projects. So we've been planning this. There's a question embedded about planning, so we have been thinking about this. We've been planning for this capital project for years. In essence, I think they asked about, is it funded every year? It is funded by the community, and we are, if we have surplus funds and the Board of Education determines we should make that transfer, we're doing that every year that we have surplus funds. Let's see, they asked about some debt, right? So as part of the proposed referendum and resulting project, the district will be incurring new debt to fund the upfront costs of construction, and this borrowing would occur over a 4 to 5 year period, with each issuance of debt repaid over a 15-year period. And, as I mentioned, the building aid would reduce the net cost to the district because it's basically revenue and it offsets the expense of the repayment.
And that goes to the chart, sort of, you shared a little.
Correct.
A couple of minutes ago.
Correct.
Okay.
That local share is the difference between the cost of the debt service minus the building aid.
Correct. So question number 3 is, when will the actual construction begin? Will this disrupt the children's learning during school hours?
Okay, so we anticipate construction would begin in the summer of 2025. But again, there's a few caveats with that. I mentioned New York State Ed Department has to review and approve plans and specifications, so that can always be a little bit of a wild card. How quickly will they review it? They're notorious for being understaffed and delays. But, presuming all goes well, we would start 2025, summer of 2025, and the project or series of projects, right, I said this is really a series of projects, dozens of projects actually, would last for 4 or 5 years. The phasing of the project will ensure there's no disruption to students. That's one of the, the difficulties we have to deal with as a school district.
That's why it'll take longer as well, right?
Correct, because we have to work around the school year. We have to do things potentially after hours on a second shift, so we're not disrupting students. There will be no,
Disruption.
significant disruption to students.
So question number 4 is very similar to question number 1, I believe. It's, when are we going to address the extreme heat conditions in the elementary and middle schools? Classroom temperatures exceed 90 degrees, which is neither safe nor healthy. During the summer, our custodial staff does a tremendous job of cleaning and preparing the building for upcoming school year. This is very physical labor and is being performed in excessive temperature. Again, neither safe nor healthy.
Well, I addressed that to some degree. Unfortunately, we had to make those tough decisions, and we did not include new air conditioning at the schools.
Just to sort of ask a take on this question, so if during the summer we have, our buildings are potentially could be, if they were 90 degrees or warmer, what do we typically do if it's 90 degrees, 100 degrees? Some of our offices are air conditioned in the
Right.
school, so it's the classrooms, and some of
Right.
the classrooms do have air conditioning. So what do we do with the custodians if the temperature is so high? Do we ever ask them to not work, or?
We have made accommodations like that.
Okay.
They can work either earlier, like sort of a shift, shift the regular shifts so that they're working during cooler time of the day, earlier, knocking off earlier, that sort of thing. Obviously, we allow people to take breaks, and, monitor them, for everything associated with working labor, in heat.
Right.
But there are parts of each building, like as you mentioned, Elsie, offices and certain other parts are air-conditioned, and so there's also the option of having breaks in those conditioned spaces as well.
And I do think that some of our buildings, what adds to the heat is also the number of people. So when school is in session, I'm going to take the middle school, you have 1,600 students plus another 125 staff members. So of course, that kind of creates the heat. In the summer, we don't necessarily have that population,
Right.
with the exception of our high school.
Right.
Okay. Let's see, question number 5. First and foremost, there is not a lot of detail for the proposed $98 million project. Why is the proposed capital improvement lacking detail? One of my biggest concerns is the safety and security. I do not believe that a vulnerability or risk assessment has been done. What is or are the valid justifications for security and safety? What is the threat to all schools? Not the emotional wolf cries. Upgrades come with costs, and the costs normally affect people's lives. Do I want to protect all human life, especially children? Yes. But to ask for approval of a $98 million capital project without more details is ludicrous. What has been the plan in prior years? Was there a plan to incrementally replace or repair major systems? So again, this has a lot of parts to it.
Yeah, many. So I'll just talk about the details.
Okay.
So the district has outlined.
Can I interrupt there for
Yeah,
a
of
second?
course.
I think because the person who's asking the question is really talking about our website, and is there a lot of detail? So that's something that I believe our website, if you go to our website, there is a lot of information and detail.
Yes.
Many of our buildings will have posters with information,
Mm-hmm.
with specific details to those schools. So I do want to tell the person who asked this question that there is more detail on our website. And if there's an issue, then let us know. Maybe there's kind of an issue with the actual link, but there is a lot of information.
And the other thing I would say is we have a lot of materials out on the website, a lot of materials are going to come in the mail or available. You can call or email me as well, and we can have a conversation, and we can go through some of these things. I know there's a lot to digest. We can talk about specific buildings, specific components of the project, whatever we need to get the message out and help people understand what we're proposing and what we're trying to do. So, yeah.
So I sort of took you off the question.
No, it's okay. So that's good. We addressed there was, I think, embedded in there, a question about safety and security, and about an assessment of safety and security. So it just so happens we did conduct a safety assessment last year in our 2022-23 year. We engaged Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES. They have a school safety unit to do that. So we have done that. We did do that last year. They visited all of our school buildings. They assessed each building for security issues, operational issues. They gave us a final report. Included numerous observations and recommendations to enhance security. We've done a lot of these things, and we've talked about this a lot. We replaced locks in every one of our classrooms so that they could be locked from the inside with the turn of a knob rather than a key. We've added security film. We're doing door access control in every building. We're adding to, like, for instance, the high school has some door access control, which means you can unlock the door with an identification badge. That's beneficial because it sort of dissuades people, or they don't have to prop a door open. They don't need a key to unlock the door. They can unlock it, so it ensures, not with absolute certainty, but it's better for having all the exterior doors locked and closed. That's like sort of the first level of defense with security.
And I want to add to that piece, because we not only had a safety audit by an outside company or firm, but we also met with our teachers.
Yes.
And there's an annual meeting that we have, actually 2 times a year. We meet with our teachers to talk about their concerns.
Right.
So we took their concerns. One of their biggest concerns was the safety locks. They talked about
Right.
having, being able to lock the door from the inside if there were at any time an intruder. So that was also part of our decision-making as
Yes.
well.
Yes, very much so. And I know that the Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES met with individual building administrators, got their feedback, so there was a lot of communication about, what the concerns were and what we can do to sort of solve some of those concerns. But one of the many recommendations from that audit was adding security vestibules to the remaining schools that did not have them. So we're talking about 3 of our elementary schools, which are slated to have a security vestibule as part of the project. And this is a relatively inexpensive way to limit and control access to schools, making students and staff safer. In the event an intruder tries to enter a school, school vestibule stops the perpetrator from gaining immediate access to the building, allowing time for a school resource officer or local police to respond. In many instances, slowing down or stopping a perpetrator from gaining access to the school can make all the difference. So that's why we feel this is important. And in the scope of the entire project, it's relatively a small piece of it, actually. I think that question also contains something about capital planning and incremental repair. So the district has been planning, as I mentioned, for this project for years. So the first step was establishing the reserve, which we did. Talked about what the reserve actually is. It's a legal construct that the board established. We're able to transfer money into that. We've also waited, I talked about that, for this period of time where we're retiring existing debt, and we could bring on the new debt with no budgetary impact and therefore no tax impact. We've maintained and repaired our boilers and these other systems for decades. I touched on that, which accounts for the 50-plus year longevity of many of these boilers and heating ventilation systems. But now it's time to reinvest in our facilities. And based on the timing, based on the planning we've done, we're able to do that with no tax impact. I think that was everything.
It was.
Okay, good.
You covered all the pieces of the question. Boiler replacements in 6 schools. Which schools? 3 elementary schools. Which one? And all schools, you say the boilers have exceeded their expected lifespan. What year were these boilers installed, and did the initial contract include a maintenance plan? Will the boiler replacement have a maintenance tail, or will maintenance be assumed by the janitors? Why is there a need for a new tennis court to be lined for pickleball? Monroe just opened new pickleball courts. Does not MW District have maintenance crews to perform repairing brick facades? How old are the underground fuel storage tanks? Why do they need to be upgraded? When were they last inspected? When were they installed? Who performed the maintenance? These are just a few questions.
So I'll sort of take these in categories. So the boilers and heating ventilation improvements are slated for the following buildings: High School, Central Valley Elementary, North Main Elementary, Pine Tree Elementary, and Smith Clove. So these boilers range in age from 12 years at the high school. Now that's very new, but those boilers never worked well and were notoriously unreliable, to over 60 years old at Pine Tree. If you take the high school out, the next newest boiler is at Central Valley, and it's around 40 years old. So again, these things are slated to last 30 years, maybe 40, and in most cases, our boilers are over 50 years old. Any original maintenance agreements, I think there was a question about that, are long expired. We do have annual inspections. We have annual maintenance of the boilers. We have a contract with a local boiler company for maintenance when we have big maintenance needs. And we're going to evaluate any future maintenance agreements. They mentioned maintenance tail there, which I think is what they mean, in conjunction with our architect and engineers when the time is right. So we're not there yet to do that. In terms of the tennis courts, so they've been repaired numerous times over the years. And it's been the small repair, it's been the larger type repairs. And the problem is that the cracks they're large and they're under the subsurface now, that it's shifted. So you really can't repair what's there anymore. You have to take that up and create a new base and resurface that. So we've done that. We've tried to repair them, and it doesn't work, frankly. And my understanding is our courts, although they're playable, they're almost at the point where we couldn't have a major tournament, we can't have any major, events there because of the condition of the courts.
But they also are part of the PE classes.
Yes,
They use
Yeah.
those courts as part of their curriculum.
correct. And let's see, so I think there was a comment about the pickleball. I mean, that's, a relatively simple thing. I think we just assumed that lining them, some of them, not every court, for pickleball will increase the utility of the court and the value
Right.
for the community.
And for the students.
Yeah,
Right.
right, of course. So brick facade maintenance, so in the past, there was a question about, like, can we do that ourselves, have our maintenance mechanics do that ourselves? And I think in the past, we have done some of that maintenance ourselves, some of that work. However, I think the extent and the complexity of some of the repointing, and what we mean is, you look at the brick exterior, like this building, the mortar between the bricks starts to disintegrate and fall away. The envelope of the building is then compromised, like this
Right.
building, it's notorious for water problems, water leaks around the windows, and repointing sort of goes in, takes out that old mortar that's failing, repoints it, puts in fresh mortar, and kind of reestablishes the envelope of the building for weather. I think what we need, where there's several buildings that need that, is beyond what we can do or we want to do in-house. And it's one of those things where, when it's large enough and complex enough, it makes more sense to have a contractor that specializes in that
Right.
do that. The underground storage tanks, so we're talking about storage tanks at the bus garage, which are 29 years old. And again, at the end of the useful life, as the tanks age, repairs and maintenance becomes more expensive and increases the likelihood of a fuel spill or a leak causing extensive environmental damage to the surrounding area. Obviously, spills of this nature are to be avoided. The cleanups are expensive and can pose a health risk to residents, so it's something we obviously, we work hard to avoid and not have a problem in that area. In terms of the tanks themselves, they're inspected, I believe, monthly.
Mm-hmm.
We use American Petroleum, which is a contractor that specializes in this line of work. But again, it's one of those things, we've maintained them. They've worked well. We haven't had any of those problems, but we need to reinvest.
Question number 7 is very long, so I'm going to,
Skip it?
no.
Okay,
Nope.
just kidding.
I'm going to read it thoroughly. Safety and security. Has a risk assessment been completed, and if so, when and by who? Why is there a need for a security vestibule in 3 schools when most doors in all schools still can be entered by using a key control inspection, question mark? Can the results of some of the results be provided to the public? Most windows can be broken and the facilities entered, so in my opinion, there is no need for vestibules. Electrical panel upgrades, do these upgrades include security of panels, protection against intruders, question mark? Why is the new public address system needed? Again, purpose and task, overview of usage and the reasoning. I understand that upgrades need to be made to facilities used to teach and transport our children, grandchildren, that upgrades need to be made to facilities, used to teach and transport our children, grandchildren, yet there are so many questions left unanswered, as well as on page 2, a statement was printed, 0 tax impact for our district residents. Then on page 3, under the topic of how will the project be funded, immediately under topic, in order to minimize the impact on taxpayer, the program will be paid for with multiple sources of funding. So what is the 100% source of funding? Will our taxes increase? Can this be explained in more detail, not just through verbal or email expression?
Okay, so I think we've addressed many of those points tonight. I think to just take it from the latest questions, will our taxes increase? We've said no. The answer to that is no. I've talked about how that can be possible or how that is possible. It's principally because of state aid, 70% reimbursement we're eligible
Right.
for through the building aid program. talked about our use of the capital reserve, which is our savings, our down payment, if you will. And we've talked about the point in time where we are, where we're retiring our existing debt, and we're able to bring on this new debt with no impact to the budget. So that addresses both the budget and the increase to taxes. You know, we can put some of this out, and we have in greater detail on the website and other publications. Let's see, the electrical panels they mentioned, you know, those are the types of things which would be, for the most part, secured inside our buildings without access, so I don't really think that will be an issue or problem. They also mentioned safety and security. We sort of addressed that. We did do a risk assessment last year, talked about that.
And you mentioned too, we worked with Putnam, Northern Westchester, BOCES for that.
Right, and one of their questions is, why is there a need for security vestibules in 3 schools? We talked about that. It's a relatively inexpensive upgrade, and it was one of the recommendations from that safety audit. So I think that addressed, or we already have addressed most of that.
Right, and I think, again, back to our website for more detail, call you. And I just want to make sure that your name is there and your phone number and your email. No, because, no,
Great.
I say that
I agree.
because you have, you know, greater detail to provide them. And I think that if someone, even after they watch this and still have more questions, they should definitely reach out to you if they still don't understand parts of it, because this is a lot of information that we're
Right.
sharing with
Right.
the community. So I want to encourage that. Question number 8 is, can you tell us which boilers are being replaced and which ones are not in this capital project? I know you talked about where the boilers are going.
Yeah.
They want to know which ones are not in the capital project.
Which ones are not?
Correct.
Well, why don't I say this? I'll say what is, again, because the next question, you see question 9, what is the cost of each boiler being replaced?
So
we
you
could-
can combine the two. Got
Yeah,
it.
2 birds, 1 stone. So
Correct.
we'll say, high school, we're replacing that boiler, and I talked about that's one of the newer boilers, but that's $1.8 million, $1.8 million, relatively inexpensive. Central Valley is getting a boiler and heating ventilation replacement. That's $13.3 million. So we talked about that's a steam to hot water system.
Right.
Which will not just affect the boiler in the basement, but it'll affect all the piping throughout the building. It'll affect every unit ventilator, which is in each classroom. New pipes will have to be run, we believe, in the ceiling of the room, so it's affecting the ceilings. So that is why, and what accounts for that higher price tag of that one. It's what I was trying to describe earlier, where I said a replacement in kind is different than this, steam
Right.
to hot water.
That's why the high school is 1.8 million and CV is 13.3 million.
Correct. It's a much more extensive project. North Main, again, steam to hot water, 10.8 million. Pine Tree, the same, 11.6 million. And then Smith Clove is an in-kind replacement of boiler. It's 2.4 million.
Okay.
So 5 schools would get new boilers, and we've addressed the cost of each boiler. I mean, if you think about it in total, when you look at the numbers, 41%, 39.9 million, let's call it $40 million of this project is just boilers and
Correct.
heating. Basic stuff.
Correct. Question number 10, what is the cost of the new athletics complex being proposed? I don't know if it's called a new athletic complex, but.
Yeah, it's not really a new complex. I
Correct.
think we're saying it's field restrooms, concessions, and storage building. And the replacement of the existing tennis courts, the cost of that is $4.2 million total.
And I know that when we have families and spectators who come to our games, what do we currently have out there?
We have portable restrooms with three bathrooms on, we have 2 different units with 3 bathrooms in each of the units. One is handicap accessible.
Okay, and what are we paying for those?
We're renting those, it's approximately $40,000 a year.
For
And
each one?
For both.
For both, okay.
And they're not working well.
I know.
And we've looked out into the marketplace to rent new units, and the cost has doubled.
Right.
So we are locked in, it's almost like locked into a lease, so the price isn't going up, but the units themselves are not functioning well.
Right, and I've heard from, again, spectators who are not happy with
Mhm.
the facilities that we have, and unfortunately, that's not going to change.
Right, and that's the reason we're proposing
Correct.
outdoor permanent restrooms, accessible restrooms.
And we don't get aid on that money that we spend.
No, we do not, for the rental of those. And they've required a lot of maintenance to have minimal function.
Correct. Question number 11, it's a popular question. Will
Right.
CV get air conditioning?
Not likely, no.
Okay.
Central air was considered, as I mentioned earlier, for this project, but deemed to be prohibitively expensive and a lower priority item. Future consideration may be given to adding AC to the congregate areas, the auditoriums, the cafeterias, the libraries, that kind of thing, but not part of this project.
Question number 12, how will cost overages be paid for?
Well, it's a hypothetical. It's not to say there will be cost
Right.
overages. We're working with the Palumbo Group construction managers who provided our budget estimates. Escalation, they have an estimate, and then they build in contingency, and then they have escalation of that cost is part of the estimate. So I think, we've accounted for the inflation that we're seeing. I mean, and as I mentioned, this project, we're not going to start this for
Till
2
2025.
years, a year and a half, and then it's going to last 4 years. So, some of the inflation in the general economy, the inflation in the, construction industry may be tamped down, hopefully, and back to normal by that time. In general, I think in the event bids came in over budget, there's things you can do, value engineering, you can examine what you originally wanted to do, the scope of work, make some adjustments to save money, and then there's other options as well. We could appropriate more of the capital reserve, that sort of thing, to deal with some of these problems. But I don't anticipate that being a major issue for us.
Okay. Then the last question before we go to our audience questions is, what is the proposed completion date of the project, and what are the consequences for not completing on time? We anticipate in completing the project by, and then it's question mark.
Well, it would be start in 2025. I think we're anticipating a 4-year project, but it could push 4 to 5 years. And there really is no consequence for the district for not finishing in 4 years. I'm not sure if that's what they mean, or if they mean, what's the consequence for a contractor that we've signed a contract with not finishing on time? There's sort of 2 different questions. But from our perspective, if the voters approve this project and authorize it, we can start it as quickly as possible. I mentioned the process we have to go through with the New York State Education Department. We have to do bids as a public entity and things, so it takes a little time, but there's no rigid timeline that we have to finish by. And the idea that if we don't complete it on time, that would be something between us and a contractor, if that's what the person is referring to.
Right.
And typically what would happen is you build in the contract, there's damages if they're not done on time, financial penalties, that sort of thing. And usually in our situation where it's a school, we have to open by, September 1 or whatever, they would do, everything, move mountains to get that done on time. I don't think that will be an issue.
Right, and we go through a whole vetting process before we assign the project to a contractor.
Absolutely, we do.
So,
We work with our architects and engineers, the construction manager, Palumbo Group. We go through a bidding process. Part of
Right.
that bidding process is validating the credentials of the bidders. So not just anybody can walk in off the street and
Right.
be the low bidder and be awarded the bid. So, we examine the bids and make sure that they're compliant with what we want and need. So there's an elaborate process, and that takes time too.
thank you.
You're
I think we have one question.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Loning. I'm a district resident. Are schools getting air conditioning? I joke. I have a question for you, though, about the capital project. It's very extensive, and that's good. And I actually want to spend more money. In the run-up to the turf fields, I was here, and I asked about the pool. And you told me that that was going to be in a future capital project. Where is it? The same problem that the tennis courts have can be said about the pool. You cannot hold tournaments there. My son, my eldest son, is 27, and he was on the high school swim team. Back then, you couldn't hold tournaments because the facility was so not up to snuff. I mean, there are high schools in cornfields that have more, better facilities for this stuff. So can you tell me when the pool is going to be addressed?
Can I just go back to so I've been here a long
Please,
time,
please
and I
do.
think that, Ms. Loning, has been a question that we've asked probably before I came to the district 22 years ago.
Yeah.
I know that when they were building the high school, the pool was something that everybody, well,
Not everybody.
some people wanted, and that unfortunately was not supported by the voters. So that's sort of been an ongoing dilemma for
Right.
us. But now I'm going to let him answer the question.
No, I think that was great.
I mean, because the
I
turf
have nothing to add.
fields, they're going to be covered with snow in very
Yeah.
short order, and the pool can go till midnight, you know?
I understand, and I understand where you're coming from, and I agree. I wish we could do a new pool at the high school. I really do. It's one of those things where 5, 6 years ago, we went through a building condition survey process. We had a facility study done. We looked at what that would cost, somewhere around $12 million for a new pool, to just hook a new natatorium, that's the word for that kind of structure, to the side of the high school. Now, it's probably more like $16 million. And it's, again, one of those things where we looked at it, we considered it, we do have a pool, maybe not up to, all the standards that we'd like, but we do have one. And when you have to make those difficult choices, we had to eliminate the pool. I don't know, the one upside to all this, Lorraine, is that we did last summer spend probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $450,000, $500,000 to renovate the pool. What we did is we took off the entire inside. There was 3 layers of plaster, had been plastered over 3 or 4 times. We had a contractor come in, take that all off, right down to the concrete, replaster the inside of the pool. We repainted the whole natatorium, the inside structure, took everything off the walls, redid it. We added new bleachers. So what we did was we tried to refurbish what we have and make it better. We couldn't make it longer. We can't make it wider,
Right.
unfortunately. And I think that would go into the category of scarce resources, competing demands. Is it air conditioning? Is it a new pool? Is it a new turf field? Is it renovate more classrooms? Is it renovate the ed center? Is it, you pick it. Is it renovate the library? Tough choices have to be made, and we have to consider the wishes of the community's ability to pay, the impact on the local taxpayers, and at sort of this number in this package, we can do something that I know will have no impact on us. It's going to get us through with, some of these basic elements of the buildings for the next 20 or 30 years, and some of those questions, I would almost call that like the need to have is what we're doing now. The nice to have might be a new pool, a larger pool. The nice to have might be air conditioning, let's say at the middle school, that's notorious as one of the hotter buildings, that sort of
It
thing.
is.
We'll consider those things in the next round, the next project.
But I do want to just say something about the pool, that it is also an extension of PE, right? It's
Yeah.
part of the curriculum. So it's unfortunate because 22 years ago, when they were building the high school, I think the cost was, and I think Dr. Hassler would remember, I believe he was around maybe $4 million?
Yeah, it was.
Probably like,
It was less than, I think, the 12 million that we had looked
It-
at. I
it
don't remember
was-
the exact amount.
it was 22 years ago, so imagine that cost. And unfortunately, as we continue to wait and wait and wait, costs are only going to continue
Right.
to go up.
It
And
is a
as I
missed
s-
opportunity.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, right? And I think that what we did was going back and looking at the survey and hoping that was designed really on what the survey, what
Right.
the community responded. But I appreciate you advocating for that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are done, I believe.
it,
I
yeah.
just want to thank all of our people in the audience for coming this evening, and those viewers that are out there watching. I want to reiterate again that if you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to Mr. Cahill. We'll have his email and his phone number on the website, if it's not already there. I believe it is. And we're going to have some more of these Crusader chats, and we really, again, want to remind people that the vote will be held on December 5th at
2023.
Central Valley Elementary School from
Tuesday.
6 a.m. to 9 p.m., and we really want people to go out and exercise their right to vote. Thank you again, and have a good night.